The first time I saw Julian Voss, he was a silhouette against the neon glow of Seattle's Pike Place Market, his broad shoulders cutting through the crowd like a blade. I was 27, scraping by as a barista, my dreams of being a playwright buried under unpaid bills in a dingy studio apartment. He offered me a way out, but the price was my dignity, and I took it because hunger leaves no room for pride. My name is Ezra Kane, and I never thought I'd sell my body to a man like Julian. At 29, he was the kind of rich that made people flinch, CEO of Voss Enterprises, a tech empire that owned half the city's skyline. His sharp blue eyes and chiseled features could have starred in a Hollywood blockbuster, but his heart was cold as the steel in his skyscrapers. He didn't want love, he wanted control. Our arrangement was simple. I'd be his companion for a year, attend his galas, warm his bed, and keep my mouth shut. In return, he'd pay off my debts and fund my place. It was a transaction, not a relationship. I told myself I could handle it. The first night in his penthouse, I stood naked before a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Puget Sound, my reflection trembling in the glass. Julian didn't touch me like a lover. His hands were precise, calculated, like he was signing a contract. "You're here because I paid for you," he said, his voice low and unyielding. "Don't expect anything more." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest. I'd grown up in foster homes, bounced around like a stray. I knew how to survive on scraps. But something in his gaze, a flicker of something human, made me wonder if he was as untouchable as he seemed. Months passed in a blur of champagne flutes and silk sheets. Julian was a paradox, publicly charming, privately distant. At his side during corporate events, I played the part of the perfect partner, smiling for cameras while his hand rested possessively on my lower back. But alone, he barely spoke. I filled the silence with stories about my childhood in Tacoma, my first play, the way the stars looked over the Cascades. He listened, sometimes, his eyes softening for a moment before the walls went back up. I started to crave those moments, those cracks in his armor. I was falling, and I hated myself for it. One night, after a gala in Portland, we stood on a balcony overlooking the Willamette River. The air was thick with summer heat, and I'd had too much wine. "Why do you do this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "You could have anyone. Why pay for me?" He didn't look at me, just stared at the water below. "Because it's easier," he said finally. "No strings. No mess." I laughed, bitter. "You're lying. You're scared." His jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought he'd walk away. Instead, he kissed me, hard, desperate, like he was trying to prove me wrong. It was the first time I felt his heart beating against mine, and it terrified me. We started to blur the lines. He'd linger in bed some mornings, tracing the scars on my knuckles from years of scraping by. I'd catch him smiling at my dumb jokes, or he'd leave coffee on the counter, exactly how I liked it. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into it. But then came the night that changed everything. We were in his cabin in the Olympic Mountains, rain pounding the roof, when he pulled me close and whispered, "I don't know how to do this, Ezra." His voice cracked, and I saw it. The fear, the want, the man beneath the cold alpha facade. I kissed him, not as his paid companion, but as someone who loved him. And for once, he let me. The cabin became our sanctuary. Away from Seattle's glare, Julian wasn't the untouchable CEO. He was just a man, flawed, guarded, but mine. We spent weekends there, cooking over a fire, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his father, a ruthless businessman who'd raised him to believe love was a liability. I shared my dreams of a theater in San Francisco, a place where stories like ours could live. We were building something fragile but real, and I started to believe we could outrun our contract. Then I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't supposed to be possible, not with the science we had, not with two men, But medical advancements had changed the game for couples like us. I was 28, terrified, and carrying a child that was half mine, half Julian's. I told him one evening in the penthouse, my hands shaking as I showed him the test results. His face went blank, like a computer rebooting. "This wasn't part of the deal," he said, his voice ice cold. I felt like I'd been slapped. "It's not a deal anymore," I snapped. "This is us." He turned away, staring out at the city lights. "I need time," he said. I waited, but he never came back to me that night. The next few weeks were a slow unraveling. Julian buried himself in work, avoiding me like I was a problem to be solved. I moved back to my old apartment, refusing to be his kept boy any longer. The pregnancy was hard. Morning sickness, doctor's visits, the weight of doing it alone. I sent him updates, hoping he'd show up, but he didn't. My heart broke a little more each time. I named the baby Luca in my head, imagining a life where Julian held us both. But at 12 weeks, I woke up to blood and pain, and by the time I got to the hospital, Luca was gone. The grief was a tidal wave, drowning me in guilt and loss. I didn't tell Julian. I couldn't bear to hear him say it was for the best. I threw myself into writing, pouring my pain into a play about love and betrayal. It was raw, messy, and honest, and when it debuted at a small theater in Oakland, it sold out. I was starting to rebuild when Julian showed up at my door 6 months later, his eyes red, his suit rumpled. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice breaking. Someone had told him about the miscarriage. I wanted to scream, to hit him, but all I could do was cry. "You left me," I said. "You didn't want us." He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I love you, Ezra. I'll do anything to fix this." Julian's tears didn't erase the past, but they cracked something open in me. I let him in, not because I forgave him, but because I was tired of carrying the hurt alone. We sat on my worn-out couch, the space between us heavy with unspoken words. He told me he'd been unraveling since I left, that the company was faltering because he couldn't focus. "I saw your play," he said quietly. "It was us, wasn't it?" I nodded, my throat tight. The play had been my way of screaming into the void, and he'd heard it. He started showing up every day. Coffee runs, late-night talks, helping me with rewrites. He didn't push, didn't demand. He was trying to prove he'd changed, but I kept him at arm's length. Trust was a fragile thing, and mine was shattered. Still, there were moments, his hand brushing mine, a shared laugh over a bad movie, that reminded me why I'd fallen for him. I wanted to believe in him, but the ghost of Luca lingered, a wound that wouldn't close. One night, at a fundraiser in San Francisco, I saw the old Julian, the alpha, commanding the room. But when he looked at me, his eyes were soft, pleading. After, we walked along the Embarcadero, the bay shimmering under the stars. "I don't deserve you," he said, stopping to face me. "But I'm not giving up." I wanted to believe him, but fear held me back. "What happens when it gets hard again?" I asked. "Will you run?" He took my hands, his grip steady. "I'll stay," he promised. "No matter what." We moved slowly, rebuilding on the ashes of what we'd lost. Julian sold his penthouse and bought a house in Berkeley, a place with a garden where we could start over. We grieved Luca together, planting a tree in his memory, a quiet promise to carry him with us. Julian wasn't perfect. He still had his edges, his moments of doubt, but he showed up. Every day, he chose me. My play went on tour, and Julian came to every show, sitting in the back, clapping louder than anyone. One night, in a small theater in Chicago, he proposed. Not with a ring, but with a script, a play he'd written about us, messy and real. "I want to write the rest of our story together," he said, his voice shaking. I said yes, not because he'd fixed everything, but because he was trying, and that was enough. Years later, we adopted a little girl named Lila. She had my eyes and Julian's stubbornness, and she filled our home with chaos and joy. The pain of losing Luca never left, but it became a part of us, a reminder of how fragile love is. Julian wasn't the cold alpha anymore. He was my partner, my home. And as we stood together on that San Francisco rooftop, watching the sunset, I knew we'd fought for something worth keeping.